All right, guys. So in the previous session, what we discussed is, or what we did is REST API, REST connector, which is basically called connect REST rule, connect REST. So basically, we did an integration using REST connector with an external system, and we set that up. Everything we set up using REST connector wizard, right? In this session, we are going to set this up all manually so that you know the context why we need to create an integration class, what we create in integration class, how properties are mapping with that, how we create property, why we are naming the properties that way, and then how we are consuming those basically that connector into a data class, how we are creating a data class, why we are creating a data class, stuff like that. It is very important. The wizard, yes, if you already understand, wizard is the quick way to create it, but for the understanding purpose, wizard is not a good solution, right? We need to learn. So that's why we are going to do it all manually now. All right, so we need an API, a simple API, not very huge API, so that we do not spend a lot of time just creating the classes and all that. Okay, so I've got one API, this one, which I just configured in the SOAP, right? And this actually takes employee ID as a parameter, get method, and it actually returns the employee information. Okay, remember, you need to look at the structure. Look at the structure. If you look at this response can be one page, isn't it? Within that page, there is a single value property called status and its value, and then there is a page structure property data. Page structured, why? Because it has multiple scalar properties. And then the data has a scalar property id, name, salary, and all that. And then again on the same response page, we have another scalar property called message that actually gives us the message, basically whatever message the API returns. For example, I just, okay, it's taking two. See, this time it says that successfully. Okay, there is no error, there is no data, but API was successful. It should ideally have sent us a message that no record found, but that's fine. That is how the API is implemented. We are okay with that. Um, all right. So if I just remove this, see, there's a message called error, page not found. Contact this, right? So this is why we use that message tab. So now we are going to set it up into Pega. Okay. So I'm going to log in. Remember, we start with one integration class. That's where we will create our API. Okay, and from that API, we will have all those stuff. But I'm going to start backward this time. I'm going to start with a data model that can accommodate the customer record, only customer record. Okay, so customer or employee. I'm going to create a data model employee. Let's look at the data returned by this API. So these are the employee properties, right? So I just need these properties only: ID, name, salary, age, and image. So we need to have ID, employee ID, name, salary, and employee ID, name, salary, age, and image. Age and let's remove image. I don't need that. It's my end application. Okay, I just need this much information from the external system. Now let's configure this on Pega. I'm going to create the data class first. So data type, and I'm going to set up a new data. Excuse me. And I'm gonna say employee. I'm gonna have it into the organization class and hence organization rule set. And in this application, I will define the properties as I wish to, okay, as I need in my application, not necessarily following the structure of the API. API we will talk about in the integration class. So I'm going to add ID, text single line, that's okay. Name, salary, and this should be decimal or it could be currency. ID, name, salary, and age. That's definitely. If we are capturing in, let's capture it as integer only. Submit it. Remember, I'm not storing the data locally, so I do not need to create a data source and store it locally. I'm just need a structure, so this will be abstract class. I'll runtime, I will get the data from the external system. That's it. Done. Employee is done. Now we will go into our organization's integration class, and I will create one class to handle employee related integration. So right click on this int class and create another class, sysadmin category class. I'm going to create a class within this integration, okay, manually. So the label of that class is going to be employee, and the class name is going to be employee. B3 int employee should be in the B3 integration rule set. Abstract only, we are not going to instantiate it, that's fine, save it. Sorry, description, emp, emp. Okay, so this is created employee. Now I can create the connector directly in this class, or I can dedicate a class for the connector, right? It is up to me. Not going to create any additional API call, but the standard structure is, see, within the country, Pega creates an API class, country info API. So if you follow that structure, I should ideally create one. Let's not follow that. Let's keep the classes to minimum. So I will create my connector rule directly in this integration class. Okay. So let's create that. Right click on this employee integration class, and this is connector, and I need a connect rest. Get employee. That's it. B3 imp int, that is fine. Create and open. This is the URL. This is the endpoint URL. I'll keep it in the bracket, this bracket, so that it ID. It means that it is a parameterized thing. Okay. See, this is all okay. And this one is not constant. Employee ID is actually a variable clipboard. and this should be mapped from a key. One second, this is all okay. API is constant, constant, constant. String node. So this is from the key. Now I need to create a property. I need to create a property that will hold the value of ID at the runtime, and that's where the service will read into this parameter to form the URL. Okay. So I will create a property request, but in order to supply the request property will have an ID as a ID as a basically property. So I'm going to create one more class here to define my request parameters. Okay, this will be object for request. So I'm going to create a class under the employee with request. That's it. Sorry. So now I should have that request. Under the request, I'm going to create a property ID. I only need ID at the moment. So I'm going to create a property ID text. That is fine. So come here. Now I will create a request property under the employee of the type the request. So create a property under the employee of type for request, create and open. And this is a page, single page. In the future, we might have multiple requests, right? And the type is going to be B3 INT uh, INT employee request. Now, if you refresh this, you will see in the employee there is a data model, there is a property called request of this type. The definition of request is this, and that has an ID as an another property. Okay, so this is what we will use request dot ID. Sorry. So when you will run this integration, the ID in this API, remember this API needs ID embedded here, right? The ID will be read from a property called request. On the request, we will have ID property. That's where the ID will be read. So this is the this is basically where to send it out, right? You get that request done. Now you need to have the response. Response is, I mean, we do not have to pass anything else in the request. Remember here we are not sending any request parameters. So no issues, nothing in the request. In the response, we will get this data. So I need to put it on a page structure. So I'm going to create a response property. And if you are going to create a response property of page type, I need to create a class for the response. So I'm creating a class, class, right? Sysadmin class response. Now remember, under the response, I need two properties, status and message, and one more property of a page type. So I'm going to create one more class under the employee response data is to define the structure of this data response. Okay, so I'm going to create one more class. Just name it data. No, it's employee, right? Just say employee data. Okay.
EMP data. EMP data.
Data should not be the name in the class because it's automatically meant that it is going to have the data of employee. So now under that I'm going to define the, okay, so first I will define the properties in the employee. So we need to create property uh, to ID. We need to stick with the case here if we want auto mapping because it is ID smaller, right? So we will name exactly same in the integration class. ID save as, then employee name exactly same. This ID has to match, okay? So it's all lowercase. Then employee salary, then employee age. Here ideally we keep everything in text only because the response in HTML, even if it is sorry, HTTP response is usually text only, okay? Even if it is integer and all anything. So let's keep it text. Sorry, I closed that. That's it, right? So this is created. Now these properties data, status and message should be created in the response. So we will create property in the response. First property is going to be status. Then it should be message. What? Message is already there? Okay, that's fine. And then data. Data is page type, so I cannot save as it. In the save as, you cannot change the type of the property. So and this is a single page of type b3 int imp response. No, not response. Employee data is of type employee. Right. Now I have this structure. I need to create a response property in the main implementation class, main integration class that I will use to map with the connector in the connector. Page of type b3 int employee response. Now I have this property. Okay, let's go back to get employee connector. Here in the response, I will map it to clipboard directly with the response property. Save it. Okay, this is mapped. You can use JSON as well. It will automatically map to that JSON, or it's a page structure. Let's keep it JSON at the moment. JSON automatic mapping happens in Pega if the property name are same. All right, so now we should be able to use it. Use this data connector. Connector, you cannot directly trigger it. You can run it through an activity or data page. Remember the data class that we created? This employee data class. I'm going to create a data model or data page in this class, and I am going to need a parameter ID. Employee ID has to be passed, and I'm going to use a connector, that connector only. Rest get employee. See, this is in this class, employee class. So you need to write a request data transform to read this parameter from the param page and set it into request.id. Okay. So request dt. So this request dt will read the parameter from the data page, or basically we will pass the parameter id from the data page to this data transform, and all it will do is it will set it into the request dot id equals to param dot id. So at the runtime, that's how id gets id gets available to the connector. Remember, this is a data page. In the data class, when you use the connector, automatically this request will be in this class, in the integration class. Okay, so we got the parameter id and we set it on the request. Now here you will have to pass the parameter id. So we have the same name. I think we have the same name, id only, so we can pass that. All right, so you will get the request, but remember that has a different class, right? This integration has a different class and data model is a different class. So you need to write a response data transform to convert from the integration class data to data class data. So response dt. So when you create a response dt, Pega automatically set up the data source. Whatever return you get, it will be stored into a property called data source. Okay, and the definition of that property is going to be, by default Pega provides that or populate that automatically in your integration class. So update the primary page. Remember, this is in the data. Response is always in the data class, data page class. Okay. So we are going to update on the employee class from the integration class. We are going to set the response one by one. So comment is okay here. Update page primary set age. Now age is going to be under the response dot data dot employee age. Similarly, ID is going to be response dot data dot id. Similarly, name is going to be response dot data dot employee name. Salary is going to be response dot data dot salary. Image we are not need, we don't need. Now you can do exception handling as well. Remember, the response has this message. You can check if status is fail, you might want to set some error. If message, you want to use the message to set that. We will do that in the next step. Okay. So response is okay. Now let's save it. This data page is pretty much okay now, ready under the data class. So we are going to invoke the integration class from the data class, get the data and convert it into the data class. Run it. ID1, execute this. See, you get a lot of data there from there, right? But you only used age, ID, name, salary in your format, but you needed the integration class to map things automatically. We got it, right? Now you could use a message. Maybe on the primary page you want to see the message as well. If something goes wrong, you can do a exception handling. You can say when status not null. Here basically you don't do update page, right? You just add another sibling above, and here you say when the, okay, so data source dot request, or you can do one thing, set the there should be out of box property error, py error message. You can use that error message. Sorry, status, py status should be there. mm, no, py message code is not there. Py method status you can use, and you can copy that status from data source dot response dot status, and you can then, in the next step, you can then say when this py method status not equal to success. That what we are getting in the return. Yeah, success. You can say if it is not equal to success, then you do not do any mapping. You set some error or something like that. You can exit data transform. You have already set the method, right? It will show the status. You can set the other stuff as well. Error message code, py message code, message body maybe, but this time not status, it's message. So message is already set. If this is not success, you do not basically update the page, you simply exit it. the data transform. All right, so this way, this is basically how manually we set up a proper structure basically for integrating a system, an external system using REST API. And that's where we actually are going to conclude this session.